one of the reasons why we support these programs is because often in places where resources and support are limited, they might be the only organized feminist presence in some of the counties in Montana, and it makes them just an incredible resource to women in those communities. We've been privileged to see how those local advocates come together to support each other. They create a unified front that can advance good public policy. They collaborate on statewide strategies, share resources, and build skills, and they do that through the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence, who you will also hear from today. So these local programs and statewide advocates work together. It just means that more women across Montana have a real path to safety and stability, and that the advocates have support in an area of work that is just incredibly demanding. So we're honored to be joined by 4 leaders who are going to give us their insight and expertise. Our moderator, Kelson Young, is the director of Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence and will guide the conversation. And then our panelist, Jen Battles, is the co-director of Domestic and Sexual Violence Services in Red Lodge. Brandy Clark is the executive director of Safe Harbor in Lake County. And Beth Brenneman is a contract work lobbyist who worked with Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence during the session. So we're excited that they're going to share what they're seeing on the ground, what holidays means for families who are under strain, and then how we all can play a role. So like Kristen said, they'll have a panel discussion. Feel free to put your comments or questions in the chat. And then we'll hopefully have a few minutes at the end to address questions or open it up for questions if time allows. So thank you again for being here. And Kelson, I'll turn it to you to get us started.
Thank you so much, Kylie, and the rest of the Women's Foundation staff. We really appreciate this opportunity. Hello, everyone. My name is Kelson Young, and as you heard, I'm the director of the Montana Coalition Against Domestic and Sexual Violence. A little bit about us. We are a statewide organization that has been in operation since the early 80s. We represent the needs of survivors of both domestic and sexual violence, both at the state level, the community level, and the federal level. We are not a state agency. We're an independent nonprofit organization, although sometimes people get confused about that, so it's important to make that delineation. And we are an association of these amazing victim service programs that operate across the state. We advocate for them at the state capitol when it comes to funding or other policy, and as well as at the federal level. I've had the privilege of doing domestic and sexual violence work since I was 19 years old, and it is a wonderful career to have. Making a difference in your community is something we all seek, I know, and being able to do so on behalf of women and children and families has been a privilege of my life. I will say from the beginning, we're having this conversation as part of the Women's Foundation. We will probably default to using the term women often, but our movement is very clear that we serve all genders and gender identities. And so just from the start, want to say that our services are open to all. Our philosophy is open to all, and we understand that violence can occur in any type of relationship. And within the family, that violence shows up in lots of different ways across generations. So just to set the tone from the beginning that we are an inclusive movement, and in fact have learned a lot about how important power and control dynamics are in our society and certainly in intimate relationships. So thank you so much for being here today. This is going to be a conversation amongst friends. And so we're excited to be able to, show you our world and talk more about how you can get involved and how you can support families in your community. We will have time at the end for questions. So please, be thinking of ways in which you'd like to engage in this conversation as well. But for now, it's going to be us talking to you and sharing a bit about our work. So first, I'll start by asking Jen and Brandy to tell us more about their local program. Across the state of Montana, we have victim service programs operating in every county. The interesting thing about Montana is many of our programs serve multiple counties, upwards of 9 counties at times if you get over to eastern Montana. So we have incredible advocates who serve very large service areas, and each community looks different in terms of what services are available. So we're going to start with that ground setting information so that folks can just be aware of who you're hearing from today and know that we will also circle up at the end and share information about all the other programs in Montana. But for today, we'd like to start with an introduction about the folks who are with us today. So Jen, I'll go to you first if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about your program.
Oh, sure. Thanks, Kelson. Hi, everybody. I'm Jen Battles. I am one of the co-directors at Domestic and Sexual Violence Services. We are in Red Lodge, Montana, but we serve two counties. We serve Carbon and Stillwater counties, so we cover 4,000 square miles and about 20,000 people. We're a community-based victim service program, so we serve all survivors of domestic and sexual violence in our two counties. We provide everything from emergency shelter to legal advocacy. We help folks who are interested in participating with law enforcement. We provide financial assistance when we can. And we connect survivors with an advocate that will help them get where they want to go. So their definition of success is what drives our work. We've been here for 26 years. We started in 1999, and we are a nonprofit. We've always been. So I guess that's a good kind of roundabout way to start. I'll kick it to Brandy.
Thank you, Jen. Brandy.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Brandy Clark, Executive Director for Safe Harbor, and we serve Lake County and the Flathead Reservation, which is it's a fairly big county, about 3,000 square feet, I believe. So we have so many different types of things. We have our legal advocacy. We have 2 staff attorneys. We have our shelter. We have our crisis line, 24-hour crisis line. We have our thrift store that we provide goods and services for a lot of our clients, and then many people in the county as well. And we do provide a women's and children's group every Tuesday night. We provide food for them, and they're able to come and speak to therapists, and the kids and the women are separated into different rooms. And we also have a men's accountability group. Well, I'm trying to think of all the things that we have. We also do the financial support for our clients. We have vouchers that they're able to get fuel for their vehicles. That we have grocery vouchers, and then of course, if they're in need to provide anything for their new homes, if they're moving into a different place, we have that as well. We just have been here. So I've only been here for almost 3 years now, but Safe Harbor has been available to those survivors, victims for 33 years. So
wow,
it's
that's
a
amazing.
strong organization that has been here for a very long time. So
Thank you, Brandy. So you've just heard from 2 of our rural programs. Of course, in Montana, everything's rural, but there is differentiation between our more urban programs, such as Billings, Missoula, Great Falls, Helena. Some of our larger communities have pretty substantial facilities. So they have an actual shelter, maybe a transitional housing units as well. So the amount of services, the type of services that are provided really does vary by community. But when you think about our more urban communities, you can assume that they have a facility that houses X number of families. In our more rural communities, sometimes there's a facility, like they might have a safe house or a safe apartment or a townhouse or something like that. But when they say that they're providing shelter, they're having to find other ways to provide shelter as well. And our movement across the state has a really wonderful working relationship with hotels and other sorts of lodging facilities. And we make it work across the state in whatever way we can in terms of trying to find housing and emergency housing, especially for families. So again, depending on the community that you're connected to, those direct services might look slightly different. But the general theme is that we are trying to provide as much and as many services that the survivor needs, both while they're in the relationship and when they leave and after the fact. The thing about domestic violence is just because you leave doesn't mean the problem's over. There's a lot of aftermath, and oftentimes advocates are helping people along that spectrum. So we wanted to tell you more about, this time of year, the holidays. It's stressful on all of us for many reasons, but the reality is that domestic violence and sexual violence and just the tensions within a family often increase around the holidays. So we wanted to tell you more about that, both so that you can identify it and see it in your own relationships, but also so that if you wanted to get more involved in terms of trying to prevent some of that family strife during the holidays, you would have some more resources to do so. So again, I'm going to ask Jen to tell us a little bit about what kind of trends you see, what are the needs that you see in your community around this time as it applies to the people that you work with.
Oh, sure. Thanks for that.
Thank you, Jen.
I would say, I think the two biggest things, and Brandy will probably chime in here too, financial stress and family related stress, and are motivating factors in just an increase in violence that we see during this time of the year. And I think it's really important to just identify and acknowledge how common many of the stressors are that we're going to talk about, because they're not unique to our clients. It's that the fallout or the consequences to them are severe, right? So we've all experienced like the pressure of buying gifts during the holidays. That's can be financially stressful, or the expenses related to food and baking and hosting. There's usually multiple gift exchanges or teacher gifts if you have kids. There's stress around holiday travel and the expenses related to that. And then for some folks, just like having more mouths to feed because school is out. Those are all financial stressors that I think all of us can relate to, but they can exacerbate abuse in a home that is experiencing violence. And then with family related stress, I think feeling obligated to spend time with family members who may have a history of abuse in childhood, that's a big thing. Feeling obligated to spend time with an abuser, or having to just be around, if children are navigating a split household, for example, that may mean spending more time with an abuser, or having to just be around adults who are not safe more often. And those can all exacerbate violence in the home. And again, I don't think any of this is necessarily unique to our service area or to our clients, but I would also say that when we talk about rurality, Kelson talked about we're in Montana. And so I think one of the things that's important to recognize, at least for our folks, is that the ability to reach resources to help manage some of this stress, there's additional hurdles to that. It's more time, it's more energy, it's more gas, it's more, right? And so it can be, the rurality of where we live can be very isolating and can prevent people from getting help. So I'm gonna pause here and I'll let Brandy kind of chime in on her end.
Thank you, Jen. Brandy, what would you like to offer into the same question?
Well, like Jen said, it is absolutely that financial stress that we see. It is that time of year, this holiday season, that we see the most increase, especially here on the reservation, just of, the amount of calls that we get to our crisis line, the needs of what they need for their children, for gifts. We have many clients that we're trying to make sure that we're providing for, so that they don't feel that pressure. So we're, making sure that we're providing for those families. We organize through the Toys for Tots in our local area as well. There's many churches that love to donate to us. So, we're able to kind of navigate through all of that. But it is especially hard on our advocates. They too have families, and they have their things going on. So we kind of see a little bit of burnout and stress from our advocates. So there's a little bit of issues there too, and then the family issues and trying to spend that time with each individual person, and then absolutely finding that, where do you find that dividing line of being able to have all of these family members come to your home and have everyone feel comfortable and not to have a big blow up and dysfunction in your family. I mean, we see that quite a bit, and the phone calls get pretty heavy, and it's hard on our crisis line advocates as well. So I commend all of them a lot, because they go through it. And our thrift store, we see many people coming in that are also having issues, and they're really not, sometimes it's not having to do with domestic violence, but we still try to help them as best we can as well. So it's really, it is that financial and then the family issues that we definitely do see, but a lot of it also is on my advocates. I feel for them, and I try to do the best we can to provide, some solace for them as well, because it gets pretty difficult and trauma heavy.
Thank you. Yeah, and just for those of you who may not know, when we use the term advocate, we're talking about the staff of the program. So in our world, we call our staff advocates because they are working with and advocating for survivors. So that's the term that we use, in case you hadn't heard that term before. And I was just thinking, the thing about the holidays is there's so much pressure for it to be successful. So the other thing to note is, like, sometimes what we see is the blow up happens after the holidays, or someone is ready to leave after the holidays because they've been able to, grin and bear it through the holidays, but then things really start to become unmanageable. So in general, when it comes to domestic violence, financial issues, forced family time, these intergenerational family systems where people are coming together, and there might be all sorts of different violence related issues involved, and then you add to that the isolation, the weather, the lack of resources that people have at this time of the year in general. So it probably lends itself to being pretty clear about why domestic violence might increase during this time. I think the countersuit is just that at this time of year, people want to be focused on all of the good news, right? All of the good things that are happening in our community, which is wonderful. But I think what you're hearing from Brandy and Jen is, in the meanwhile, we have advocates who are really carrying that weight. And so we do appreciate being asked, like, what is it like for you around this time of year, and how can people in our communities get more involved and contribute to that need? Because I know that we all want people to have a happy holiday. That's what we say, right? Happy holidays. And the way we get there is by being able to contribute to each other's needs. And so in that regard, Jen, what kind of things would let's say there's a woman on this call, she's from Red Lodge, she hasn't been connected to your program before, but she's interested in getting more involved. What are the kinds of things that a person like that might be able to engage with in your program?
Oh, that's a good question. There's so many ways. I would say, one thing I just want to point out is, like, oh, right. I'm glad that you said there's a lot of pressure this time of year to actually be successful. And that looks like a happy, healthy home, even if it's just on the surface. And it is the case that our program actually sees an uptick in violence in the new year, not necessarily right now. And so I think that's a common misunderstanding, is like, yes, like there's things that are building and happening during this holiday, but in terms of kind of the pressure to keep it under wraps is really high, and to put on a good face or a good show for the rest of the family or the community. And so that pressure, I think, is there. I just wanted to acknowledge that. In terms of helping, like, again, back to we all have families. I always like to point out that, everybody knows someone who could use our services at one point in their lives, whether it's you or someone you know or love. And so to remember that in your own spaces, in the places where you have control more control over the tone and the kind of the norms to demonstrate healthy relationships in your own household, and to hold people accountable to the extent that you can when you see that they're not in alignment with that philosophy, or
That's
are
such a good
saying
point.
things or doing things that are hurtful, right? Like we all
Yes.
uh at one point or another in our lives have an experience where we have the opportunity to speak up, and I think that it's super important to do so when you can, and at least be able to check in with folks and ask people how they're doing. The other thing I would say is like we at DSVS, we say we'll talk to anybody, we'll talk to any audience about who we are and what we do, because whether you have personally experienced violence in your life, like even if that's not been a part of your reality, you still have a place in the movement of anti-violence and a place in the work of the community to foster healthy relationships, right? So we're like, everyone's got a role to play here. And that can look like, at minimum, learning who your domestic violence organization is that serves your community. Learn who we are, know what our helpline number is. Like, I'm glad Brandy brought up the helpline. We get, I think that was the most shocking thing when I first took this position, was how busy we are. So for a rural community, we take 800 helpline calls a year, and I'm sure Brandy will have a similar number. And so just getting educated about like, who is your domestic violence organization, how to reach them, and then knowing what to say to someone if they come to you asking for help. And we offer volunteer advocacy training. You can come and learn about power and control and how it impacts your community, and what to say to someone when they come to you and say they need help.
I think that's
Yeah, go ahead.
Jen, if you wouldn't mind me interjecting, I think
Yeah.
that's a really good point, because I think one of the things that an average community member might not know about us is that we are in the business of helping people have these conversations. So we specifically train people to have that one-to-one advocacy in their lives. Friends and family and people around survivors are often the most impactful, both positive or negative. And so we are deeply invested in making sure that people can have that conversation, both the conversation that Jen described, which is, how can I help you? What do you need? Can I get you connected to the program in our community? But also the one that's more about accountability, right? About having clear boundaries in your home and saying, at this dinner table, we are not going to allow that kind of behavior. Our programs are in the business of having those hard conversations. And so it's an element of our work, I think, that not everybody knows that we do, but is an important part of our community advocacy. And so if you just want to better understand this issue and you want to be able to have those conversations, we are here for that as well. And just want to reiterate what you were saying, Jen, because it's such an important part of the work we do that I think often isn't known by the community. So thank you for that. Brandy, are there ways that folks in your area can get more involved around this time?
Well, we have the different community partners that we associate with and help out through our holiday season. So we have our Helping Hands organization. That's another nonprofit organization here in Lake County. And so they're doing Holiday Hands is what they've called it. And it's kind of like a Salvation Army type deal, but it's for the Holiday Hands, and the portion of all the funds that are raised go to all of the local Lake County families that are in need. So we have that. Both myself and my director of development and outreach, we're on the Chamber of Commerce, and so we're able to actually put information out through our chambers to be able to provide people with any type of needs that they have. We have obviously our website that they can get a hold of us, and if they're interested and want to be able to just help in any way, they usually call our main office line. We have many different ways that people are able to, and I'm part of the church, one of the Presbyterian churches here in Polson, so they're always, the churches are amazing, and they have been always very helpful with us in our organization. The tribe as well. So for CSKT and then SKC, the college that we have here, we have a college advocate that is able to, do a lot of our programming and answer any questions that that people have. We have great relationships with most of those community partners, especially with law enforcement, county attorney's office, all of that. They're all amazing, and they put the word out for us quite a bit, and that's a good working relationship that we have with them.
Great, thank you, Brandy. So I would offer just in terms of the larger perspective of the programs across the state, a couple ideas. Most of our programs have websites or Facebook pages. A lot of them do newsletters, and especially around this time of year, the newsletter is going to say things like what they need donated, if they have families in shelter. So a lot of what Jen and Brandy have talked about is all of the ways in which we help families, but you can imagine a mom in a shelter has a particular challenge. And so it might be that there's, a whole list of things that mom needs to be able to provide a good holiday for their family. One of the things that, again, people don't often know is sometimes people are fleeing with very little. And so they might come to the shelter not having much more than what fits in a backpack. And so it really is about all of those ways in which we can tangibly support that family. And those things are obviously more obvious and really easy to find out from a program, either through one of those newsletters or other ways. The other thing, though, is that, as you heard, we need more volunteers in our work. I don't know if it's the pandemic or what happened, but volunteerism in general has really gone down for nonprofit organizations, especially like in-person volunteering. And so we did want to create a space for us to talk to you about the opportunities that are available around volunteering. So actually working in a shelter or volunteering directly with families, that may not be your cup of tea, but there are ways in which you could get to that level if you wanted to. And there's training programs, and our programs invest a lot of time and energy into their volunteers because there's certain training requirements. There's we have to ensure that people are safe to work directly with families, but there's a ton of other sorts of volunteering as well. Many of our programs, as you heard Brandy say, operate discount stores or other sort of like we take your donations and then we try to make some money off of it. So that works. And then obviously we have hotlines. So if you don't want to necessarily interact directly with families, but you'd still be willing to answer crisis calls, that's a wonderful opportunity. That's how I got my start in this work, is by being a volunteer advocate on the crisis line. It is not an easy task, but it's also incredibly rewarding. And if you are retired, for instance, and have a flexible schedule, it can be really helpful to be able to have folks that can volunteer at various times of the day. So the crisis line, there's also like housekeeping and other sorts of like, janitorial stuff that you can get down with if you like that kind of a thing. And then lastly, we are always looking for women leaders or leaders in general who are willing to contribute their vast experience and expertise to our programs. The majority of victim service programs in Montana are community-based nonprofits. There are some that work within the system, but they all have to have boards of directors. They have to have various people in their community who support them. And so we really want to remind you that this movement here in Montana is a wonderful opportunity for you to get more involved and to take on some of those concrete tasks that we really wouldn't be able to do it without the volunteers and supporters that do this kind of work. And for whatever reason, volunteerism has really gone down in the last couple of years. And so we just want to make sure that that ask is on the table as well, because the more people who want to get involved and contribute, the more we can have robust services without having to completely rely on our funding that funds staff. And in that note, I'm going to shift our gears a bit, which is to talk about the policies and funding that exist and how that's such an important part of our ask of you today. So in Montana, and actually across the country, victim services are funded with a variety of federal, state, and local / foundation grants. Obviously, private donations are amazing. The reality is private donations generally don't get us to a place of a stable functioning organization. They are wonderful and they help us do the good stuff, but we really do have to rely in order to operate on federal and state grants. And specifically in Montana, we have grants that come from the federal government. They go to an agency within the state called the Montana Board of Crime Control, and then they fund all these programs across the state. I'm not going to get into the boring weeds and tell you all about all the different funding streams, but what I want to say is it's only in the last 4 years that the state of Montana has actually invested resources in victim services in Montana. So up until let's see, what year is it? 2021 session, we were completely reliant on federal funding. We started asking for more funds from the state, and it took us several sessions of just talking about the need. And finally, the state decided to invest in victim services in the 2023 session. So for the first time ever, we were able to secure $4 million, which might sound like a lot, but in the big picture, it's just enough. So $4 million of state general fund money that went to the Board of Crime Control, and that partnered with the federal funds to make the pie what we needed. And let me tell you that had the state not done that, we would have been $4 million less of a pie, if you know what I mean. That's not enough to eat. Let's just say that. So we want to talk to you about the fact that when it comes to victim services, because so much of this critical infrastructure of victim services across the state is reliant on these federal grants, unless the state continues to invest, we are going to be in dire circumstances. And honestly, that $4 million investment is the only thing that kept programs from closing. We were successful again in 2025 in getting another $4 million. And again, this partners with the federal money and funds victim services across the state. It was a harder battle and a much more strange battle, but we were able to secure again a $4 million, not increase, but just a continuation. If you were to look at the money that goes to corrections or prosecution or law enforcement, significantly more. And one of the things that advocates have been trying to help our communities understand is that the criminal justice system does not work without victim services. When we expect victims to be able to come forward and tell their hard stories and then be willing to help with prosecution and testify and all of these things that we ask survivors of crime to do, and then we don't have a victim advocate or a victim program for them to be able to work with, that won't function in the way that we've all come accustomed to. The reason that survivors often feel empowered enough to participate, and this is of all crimes, really, the reason they feel empowered enough to participate in the process is because they have support. They have someone who is helping them through that process. They have someone who's helping them shelter themselves and their kids, so that the myriad of victim services that we have available in Montana, without that, our criminal justice system won't work. And so we see ourselves as a fundamental part of that structural integrity in terms of being able to have safe communities. So, as you can imagine, asking for state general fund money is not an easy thing to do, and it takes a ton of education of legislators in order to help them understand why we can't just rely on the federal money, why we can't just rely on private donations. This really has to be a multi-pronged strategy to fund this work. And so the other thing we wanted to talk to you about is, like, if you care about these issues and want to get more involved, here's how you can when it comes to policy. So the coalition, as you heard, we work at the state level to ask for those funds, and we do so on behalf of our programs. They are very involved in making those requests as well. And Beth is our contract lobbyist who really helps keep the ball moving through the process. Beth is a long-term lobbyist and advocate for many issues that we care about and knows how to work that process. And so we have been very fortunate in having her work alongside the coalition to be able to secure these resources. And right now, between now and the next session, we are invested in really trying to map the conditions that exist in our state. So Beth has spent the last 6 months traveling to many of our programs to really see what are the needs on the ground in terms of infrastructure, in terms of capacity, and trying to find some sort of like, this is the bare minimum of what we should have in our communities, because so many of our counties don't have any advocates. And like I said, they might have an advocate program 7 counties away that maybe travels out there once a month, but like we have plenty of places where the basics aren't even being provided. And then we have places like Billings where they're like, oh, we got too many advocates. And we're like, no, 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 you don't have too many advocates. You can never have too many advocates, for one. But also, Billings doesn't represent the rest of the state, you know? So we're having a bit of a hard time making sure legislators understand all that complexity. So we need folks like you to understand it so that you can help us make the case for why victim services needs to continue to be funded at the state level. As you heard, they're doing incredible work. And so I'm going to hand it off to Beth to give us a picture about what she's been seeing across the state in terms of the needs from victim services programs. Beth.
Yes, thank you. You know, when I started working with the coalition, I was like probably everyone else in the community that doesn't work on these issues, and I assumed that there were certain things in every place in Montana that were available for me if something happened to me, if I was a victim of a crime in some way, and that's not true. And I think that unfortunately, because many of these issues were addressed in the political sphere 20, 30 years ago, that people think we've won the war. And we have not. There's been backsliding. We have never had an infrastructure that is adequate to the need. And so sometimes when we talk to people, legislators, they're a little surprised that we need any help at all. They think it's all funded by the county or by the city or by the state and the feds. And as Kelson mentioned, it's all grants. And none of those grants are inevitable. None of those grants are mandatory. And I have to say, to have a program for 26 years or 33 years, that is no small feat. That is an extraordinary accomplishment. And so one of the things that has been really eye-opening going across the state is, of course, just the pure variety of programs. And this really comes from the fact that we have never had a plan statewide for where we need beds, where we need resources. And so by happenstance, a donor will donate a building or they'll buy a building and let us rent. There are little miracles that have happened all over the state to be able to fund and provide the kind of shelter and services that we need to keep people alive, frankly. And so we are a very, very, very diverse state in the kind of services that we have, and that's good and bad. And I'll say Billings is extraordinary, but they still need more resources because many of the outlying communities go to Billings. Same thing with Missoula. That's going to be true for pretty much any of your urban programs. And I'll say that yes, we did have a lot more volunteerism before COVID. Nearly every one of the programs have noticed that and have noticed that correlation between the two things. And I think that many people are staying home for lots of reasons, but that means that we have more needs. There was a yoga person going to one of the programs I visited, a yoga instructor, and that was extraordinary. And that person doesn't have the time anymore and stopped during COVID. And when that happens, a certain kind of entropy occurs and there isn't another volunteer to take their place. There are so many ways that a person can help a program, and each one of them is different. So I wouldn't assume that everybody wants a yoga instructor, although maybe they all do. So anyway, they're all quite different, but I'll say we do not have enough safe beds. We do not have enough operating so people can make more than $16 or $18 an hour doing extraordinarily difficult work. I will say that longevity of workers has really crashed. We used to have people who did this for 20, 30 years, and now we have people that can only really do it for two because of how heavy it is, and
Sure.
they can make the same amount of money in a different circumstance that isn't nearly as taxing. And so we have lots of different needs that can be filled by wonderful people like those that are on the Zoom call. But getting back to the funding needs, we of course need to have something that's predictable for a funding scheme. There was a question in the chat about the federal funds, and I'll say they went from 2018 to $11 million to 2.5 a couple of years ago. Thankfully, they've gone up to $5-ish million. Just very just quickly, they often come from unsustainable sources, or at least sources that could get hit by things that have nothing to do with our needs, district court fees, et cetera, et cetera. So when we have a settlement against Bitcoin, that's great. And that goes into the fund. But when we don't, and we don't have civil litigation like we did, we kind of paused in that during COVID, that disappears regardless. We need to have state money. We also need to have private money. I think that many of the programs have their own endowments. So think about that. We're talking about maybe another endowment too that could fund all of the programs, but many of the big programs already have them. And please, please, please consider and tell other people about the fact that those exist. That's a very important thing. But I'm going to say we also need to have support in the form of state legislators who know that this is an issue for you. To ensure that we keep the state funding, we need people to open their eyes and see that they are responsible for serving Montanans. The federal government did it for a long time, but it's not their responsibility. These are our Montanans that need to have this sort of service, and that it isn't automatically occurring if they don't do something about it. Unfortunately, I'm going to say we can't assume that legislators of any stripe agree with us that these are important services. There are any number of different cultural sorts of trends that are occurring that makes people question the need, or maybe put it as a secondary or tertiary or further down the list kind of issue. And one thing that the people on this call can do that would help us quite a bit is to make it an issue for your legislators when they're running again, and make it an issue, and actually make it an issue for everybody as they're running again, but legislators especially true, governors especially true, law enforcement, local law enforcement especially true, judges especially true. There are many, many different people that are looking at this issue as one that is not nearly as compelling or clear to us as we used to be able to assume. And so along with the work of the legislators that'll help us with state funding, when you ask those questions of other people that represent us, mayors, city council, county commission, again, law enforcement, you're helping us change the culture, which really needs to occur because of the particular political state that we're in. So I'll hand it back to you, Kelson. I hope I answered your question, but that could do us a tremendous amount of good.
Knocked it out of the park, of course. Thank you, Beth. So Jen, I'm going to go to you and say, what do you think about that? What would you want your community to know about how important what Beth and I were just talking is?
Oh my gosh. So incredibly important. I think, again, just recognizing that the voice of anti-violence needs to live in all of our spaces, right? So it's not just in our office, and it's not just like we need to ask those that are representing us in places of power and in places where policy is being made and where money decisions are being made. We need to ask them what they think about our work, what they think about the anti-violence movement, and hold them accountable, right? And really demonstrate that it is a pervasive issue that affects all of us, and they need to make it a priority. And I would just say, like, I have sat on Red Lodge's City Council, and I would encourage folks to, on this call, to think about offering up your expertise in spaces like that as well. If you can be one of those elected people in your local community or higher, if you could be on a school board or a city council, please consider doing that, because you're going to bring your anti-violence voice to those spaces, and we desperately need that. And the other thing I would say is Beth really did, a great job of highlighting, like, our federal and state funding dollars do not match the need that we have. They never have. And really we are quickly losing like just the cost of living, you know, like the cost of living in Montana in the last 5 years is so drastically outpacing our financial ability that we just can't help survivors be as safe as they used to be, or as we used to be able to. And so that needs to be addressed as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I would just offer that the federal funds that we rely so heavily on have become so cumbersome that my dear friend Brandy and Jen spend all of their time trying to do grant compliance and trying to like meet the basic expectations of these funders and jump through all the hoops. And then situations happen like what happened to Jen's community last fall, where the funding went away. They had to try to figure out how to sustain a program for a whole year, and then it came back. Like, the volatility in our work really is incredibly intense, and the work expectations for our administrative staff have increased so significantly that any donations that we receive, any private money, any foundation money, it feels like Christmas morning, let me tell you, because if you get federal and state money, it comes with so many strings and so many administrative hours attached, that the fact that my directors last longer than 3 years, hold on tight, Brandy, is a miracle, because really between the stress of the job and the stress of the funding, it's incredible just how taxing this is on our work. And then you add to it, when the federal government shuts down, that stops a lot of the funding streams from coming to the state. People are way backed up. So people often ask us, how does the federal government situation impact you? And it impacts us every single day, because the direct line between them and us is so intense that we are completely dependent upon that volatility. And so part of our investment at the state level allows us to be just a little bit less dependent upon the federal government, which is a wonderful thing. So we're at a good place to stop and see if there's any questions. Before we do that, Brandy, any closing words from you before we move on to questions?
No, I just want to echo Beth and with Jen and Kelson. Absolutely. That is the number one priority for us. Is, you know, the funding is a big thing. And whether it's private, state, federal, you know, we have even become dependent on our thrift store. And they have been a big integral part of where we can even remotely think about expenses, repairs to our buildings, things like that. And we are going to end up with some repairs to our shelter that we are renting right now. And so, you know, all of these things are very important and integral. And if everyone can really just learn and understand, you know, the quality of work, the quantity of work, and our advocates and the victims, survivors, they are so important to all of us, and you know, we want to make a difference. So
thank you so much, Brandy. And she put a really good point on it too, which is that we do what we can to try to diversify our funding as much as we can. Our advocates and our directors are so inventive. They come up with all sorts of ways to try to sustain that basic need. And so when people come to us, like, your money will be put to good use, and know that we are doing everything we possibly can to stay afloat. All right, Kylie, I think we'll stop there and see if folks have questions. We're happy to answer them, and we hope that this has met the expectations of what people joined us here for today, and also happy to go in a different direction if people need us to. So thank you for having us. It's really a privilege to be able to speak to you all before the holidays.
Well, thank you so much, Kelson, Brandy, Jen, and Beth, for just sharing a little bit about your work, about the communities that you're working in. I'll just take a second. If there are any questions, feel free to come off mute and just use your anti-violence voice and put it out into the webinar. Okay, well, feel free to follow up with myself or any of the panelists.
We do have time then. I'll show my slides, or not slides, but one of the things we wanted to make sure people knew about was that we at the Coalition maintain a website that shows you all of the programs in your area. So let me just pull that up really quick. So if you go to the coalition's website, which is mcadsv.com, this website or this page will pull up and it shows the state of Montana. We break our membership into 5 regions just to organize it. And so depending on what community you're looking to find out more information about, if you were to click on Region 3, for instance, which is Central Montana, that's going to take you to another page, which is our public-facing coalition manager. It's just a website where we have all this information. If you scroll down, it then is going to list all of the programs in that region. So these are all of the Central Montana programs. And we have a ton of information here. So you can get a program's website. If you click on more information here, it will list what kind of services are available. So a great resource in terms of if you are trying to find out more about your community, what programs are available, and or make referrals to people that you know need services. That's across the state. And then just know that also if you're dealing with somebody in a different state, we often can help connect people to resources in other states as well. So I wanted to make sure that was available to folks.
Great. Thanks so much, Kelson. Just like our panelists spoke to, we've all been in a situation where either we ourselves or someone who is close to us has needed support at one time or another. And I have called on people and called local programs and called friends and said, what is a resource in your community? How can I connect someone? And MCADSB and all of the local programs have just, they're just such a valuable resource for people. And I just can't thank you all enough for your work. As you all heard, the needs are significant. Beth, thank you for just giving that rundown. That was you being such a fantastic advocate for those programs in this funder space, because I learned so much about sort of what to think about in terms of the needs. I know that you're all incredible advocates at the Capitol in your communities and with funders like myself and others. So thank you for that. Kristen, if you wouldn't mind putting up the slide with the QR codes. I just want to give one more plug about how important it is for you to support the local victim service programs. One, through donations, and you can put your phone on any of those QR codes and it'll bring up the donation page for the presenters that we had today. So through donations, they expressed how critical just general private support is, giving them the flexibility to do what they need for folks in their community. But also, I mean, I just, as I was taking notes, volunteer, underlined like 25 times. You all just really also need the power of people in your community to volunteer with families at the thrift store if one is in place at the crisis line, or become a champion or a board member. Or simply by just spreading the word, and maybe even just sharing with people about this webinar, reducing some of the stigma that's related to talking about these issues, openly talking about the stress that the holidays creates, rather than, sort of buying into that, like, put on your perfect face. So there's so much we can do to really have healthier relationships and expectations, and then to support those in our community who are really under duress when it comes to really challenging family situations and financial situations. So just being here today is taking that step. So hope to see you all in future conversations. And unless anyone else has anything to say, Barb is asking where Barb Stiffarm is on our Women's Foundation Advisory Committee, where she can get information to post. And Barb will prepare something with this webinar with resource links and some of the learnings that we had. And you can repost that if you like.
Great.
So happy holiday season, everyone. If it's a sad holiday season, you've got people who are here with you. Take a moment for yourself today, and thanks so much for your support. Thanks again, Kelson, Jen, Brandy.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Awesome.
Appreciate it.
Thanks so much.
Thank you.